and the hepatic involvement. But most of the time, the cause of death would be septic shock with multi-organ failure from severe bleeding. It can be in the lungs in the form of pulmonary hemorrhage, the GI tract in the form of melena hemoptysis, urogenital tract or hematuria, and sometimes in the skin. And jaundice is seen at 5 to 10% of the patient with profound and orange cast to the skin, but usually is not associated with fulminant hepatitis. No? So in physical exam, you can see an enlarged liver and sometimes it's accompanied by splenomegaly. For acute kidney injury, just like what I told you, they may present with hypokalemia, hymonatremia, and sometimes the loss of urine magnesium is unique to leptospiral nephropathy. No? So if the urine is pouring out or magnesium, we might be dealing with leptospiral nephropathy. Okay. Hypotension happens when there is already acute tubular necrosis, oliguria, anuria, and hemodialysis can be life-saving at this time. So remember, one thing that you can offer is hemodialysis. Now, for leptospiral meningitis, they usually present with altered mental sensorium, and the patient may be anecteric or lack diagnosis, which will be hallmarks of severe leptospirosis. The mortality rate is high in the absence of antibiotic, as high as 13%, but it is low when you initiate antibiotics. Most of the time, they will present with necrologic sequelae. And these are the other findings that can be seen in patients with leptospirosis. No? So since it is systemic, it can also involve the pancreas, the gallbladder, the muscles, and your ECG for myocarditis. And of course, since there is diffuse bleeding, TTP, and hemorrhagic uremic syndrome. Long-term complications will present with fatigue, myalgia, malaise, headache, and autoimmune-associated uveitis. So now, how do we diagnose of leptospirosis? Since this is bacteria, the answer will always be culture and isolation. Okay? So if the organism is bacteria, um, very rarely you will be wrong if you answer culture and isolation. Okay? So that is your first giveaway question. So in making your diagnosis, you have to know the exposure, the travel history, and even the occupation. Most of the time, the laboratory findings will show leukocytosis, elevated inflammatory markers with CRP, PCT, and PCT is procalcitonin actually, and ESR. No? Because of diffuse bleeding, there is thrombocytopenia. Because of diffuse bleeding, there is disseminated intravascular coagulation. And of course, in the urinary sediments, because there is improvement, you may see proteinuria, or in severe cases, renal failure and azotemia. And just like what I told you, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and sometimes hypomagnesemia. So bilirubin levels may be high because of the involvement of the liver, likewise your liver enzymes AST and ALT. And because sometimes it can also involve the pancreas, there will be elevation of your amylase. No, when you do the CSF count, the neutrophils may be elevated early, but the lymphocytes later on, and the protein and glucose level will also be elevated. No, so that's actually a not so common finding in bacterial infections, because in bacterial infections having meningitis, usually the glucose level is low. X-ray findings are more common than physical examination findings, and when you see a patchy bilateral alveolar pattern, it corresponds well to diffuse alveolar hemorrhage, which is one of the grave complications of leptospirosis. Now, definitive diagnosis is actually isolation of organisms through culture techniques. In a positive PCR, the antibody titer of 1 is to 200, or a single antibody titer of 1 is to 800 in when you use the MAT is actually fourfold or greater increase will diagnose leptospirosis. No? So sometimes when you do the MAT test at the onset of the illness, initially it might turn out negative at first, but um, if you repeat it 10 days after, that will be the time wherein the antibodies will rise, no, leading to a diagnosis of leptospirosis. ELISA can also be used, no? So these are the diagnostic parameters that you can use to define leptospirosis. So the gold standard would be culture and isolation. You can also do polymerase chain reaction. If we're talking about direct detection method, these are methods that directly look for the organism. That's why it's called direct, no? When you do the culture and isolation or even the polymerase chain reaction. But if you're using the indirect detection method, this would include MAT test, which uses antibody response. A single titer of 1 is to 1,600 identifies leptospirosis. But if it is low at the onset, you can repeat it. And if it increases fourfold, it confirms the diagnosis. You can also use the ELISA and the non-specific test like the LAATs. So the gold standard for diagnosis of leptospirosis, just like what I told you, since this is an organism, you do culture and isolation. So you requested for laboratory workup. What would increase the likelihood that your leptospirosis is actually progressing? Leukocytosis, elevation of creatinine, elevation of your liver enzymes, and serum potassium of 4.5. If you're going to look at this table, no, patients with leukocytosis and thrombocytopenia increases the yield for leptospirosis. For your exam, no, I think you don't have to remember all the numbers. You just have to know the complications. No, I will not ask you the numbers specifically, no, uh, because it changes, no, depending on the reference you are using. For serum creatinine, it should be elevated. Of course, an elevated liver function test, prolongation of bleeding parameters. Just like what I told you earlier, in leptospirosis, most of the time sodium and potassium levels are low. But in cases wherein the potassium is already increasing, there is this is a sign that your kidney is injured. No, sometimes this would warrant dialysis. For arterial blood gas, oh, this is a life hack. If ever you are encountering microorganisms or sorry, infectious diseases, it is always metabolic acidosis, no? So, if you were given different ABG abnormalities, it should be metabolic acidosis. But as long as it is sepsis, the answer is metabolic acidosis, no? In malaria, it's also metabolic acidosis. Chest radiograph demonstrating alveolar infiltrates and of course ECG changes suggesting of myocarditis. So for this question, a very first you have to define which patient would warrant hospital admission. So in the presence of acute febrile illness associated with unstable vital signs, jaundice, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, oliguria, anuria, meningismus, very easy to remember, sepsis and septic shock, altered mental states. These are already moderate to severe leptospirosis and this would warrant hospital admission. So if the patients are admitted, you give penicillin G. But for mild leptospirosis, you only give doxycycline. Okay? Okay, so you have to remember that antibiotic therapy should be completed for 7 days, except for azithromycin, which only should be given for 3 days. Another life hack in microbiology I told you before, if we're talking about pregnancy and you do not know the answer, you give cephalosporins. No, so the alternative medications for pregnant women would be ceftriaxone. But the drug of choice for moderate to severe is penicillin G. For mild cases, doxycycline. And soon as you identify your patient to have leptospirosis, you should give penicillin soon as diagnosis is considered. You should remember that leptospirosis is not susceptible to vancomycin, rifampicin, neither metronidazole nor chloramphenicol. And antimicrobial susceptibility testing is not routinely used in practice. The antibiotics are less likely to benefit patients in whom organ damage has already occurred, but aggressive supportive care is usually essential and life-saving. This would include fluid and electrolyte resuscitation, dialysis, and mechanical ventilation. But evidence is actually contradictory for corticosteroids and desmopressin. No? So the last statement is actually controversial up to present. In the Philippine guidance, we still give corticosteroids for the benefit of mortality, especially if they are having diffuse alveolar hemorrhage already. But the recommendations will vary from country to country, no? So You just have to manage your patient on the best evidence available. So what management will you recommend to the patient? The answer is penicillin G, no? Because your patient is having moderate, excuse me, to severe leptospirosis. So we have a 24-year-old male medical student who self-consult with nausea, abdominal pain, jaundice, and after exposure to blood 1 week prior, the diagnosis is leptospirosis. Because of abdominal pain and decreasing urine output, your patient is moderate to severe leptospirosis and hence warrants admission. And because the patient should be admitted, the patient should be receiving penicillin G, no? Okay, so in Harrison, the management option is also the same. You give doxycycline for mild cases, but for moderate to severe leptospirosis, the drug of choice is penicillin G, but you can also use ceftriaxone. Now, we're going to discuss chemoprophylaxis in a while. So, what are for this question, the patient had urine output less than 12 hours despite respiratory effort. You advise the patient that it is one of the indications for renal replacement therapy. So, look at this question: uremic symptoms, elevated creatinine, dyspnea, or fluid overload, which is not an indication for dialysis, no? The creatinine level here is very high, more than 3, no? So these are the indications of acute renal replacement. Patients presenting with uremic symptoms, elevated creatinine, hyperkalemia, ARDS, severe acidosis, fluid overload, and oliguria. Um, if you remember the indications of dialysis in patients with leptospirosis, it is also the same in patients who are requiring dialysis for other causes. Do you remember the mnemonics? It's AEIOU. I think my word class students already knows this, no? So AEIOU stands for A, acidosis, E, electrolyte imbalance, especially if there is intractable electrolyte imbalance, intractable hyperkalemia, no? I is for intoxication, O is for fluid overload, and U is for uremia. So if there is uremic symptoms, this warrants renal replacement therapy or dialysis. So do not forget AEIOU. Now, for this case, dyspnea is not an indication for dialysis. Uremic symptoms, elevated creatinine, no, and fluid overload. Okay, the following statements are true regarding pulmonary manifestation of leptospirosis except A. Tachypnea is the first manifestation of involvement. Letter B. Significant risk factors are delayed initiation of antibiotics and thrombocytopenia. Pulmonary hemorrhage or giving steroid can be life-saving. No, so in other references, they would say tachypnea is the first sign of pulmonary involvement. So if you see patient with leptospirosis already tachypnic, you have to rule out pulmonary involvement. The predictors for development of pulmonary complications would be delayed antibiotic use and very low platelet at the onset of disease. And usually, if your patient has pulmonary hemorrhage, this is one usually associated with worse prognosis and high risk of mortality. The evidence would say that if you give steroid within the first 12 hours of the onset of respiratory involvement, sometimes it is life-saving and may delay the need for mechanical intubation. Okay, so remember those four. No, so for this question, tachypnea is actually the first manifestation. If there is a delay in antibiotics or thrombocytopenia, it increases the risk for pulmonary manifestation of leptospirosis. And if there is hemorrhage, it's actually associated with a very, very poor prognosis. So this is what makes the statement incorrect. Sometimes you can give steroid to delay mechanical ventilation. That's life-saving. About the prognosis, for leptospirosis, most patients they usually recover. Post-leptospirosis symptoms are usually mainly depression-like, and mortality rates are usually highest among elderly and those with severe disease. Now, leptospirosis in pregnancy is very high, associated with very high fetal mortality and good renal and hepatic recovery. Now, for prevention, prophylaxis is not usually effective 100% of the time. So since you guys are studying in Fatima University, no, it's always flooded. You should know this, no. So history of wading in the flood. If single exposure, no wound lesion, you just give doxycycline, 2 capsules, 100 milligrams, single dose. No, remember, you waded in the flood, you take doxycycline, only 2 capsules. No, but if your patient has a wound or a cut, increasing the risk of acquiring leptospirosis, you take the medication for 3 to 5 days, no, as if you need a longer antibiotic, and it should be started between 1 to 3 days after exposure. But for patients who have chronic exposure, you give them 2 capsules, 100 milligrams once weekly until the end of exposure. Now, some would you would ask, Doc, in the case of your patient with continuous exposure, I think one of my students asked this already during the ward class. This is quite confusing, no? Because it's written here, a patient with wound or cut would only require once weekly dose of doxycycline. You have to interpret it this way. In the absence of wound or cut, you give them 200 capsules single dose, then once a week until the end of exposure. But in the presence of wounds or cuts, of course, first you have to give your patient 2 capsules for 3 to 5 days and once weekly until the end of exposure. So is that clear? Oh, this one is I encountered this in the internship, no. Sorry, one of my postgraduate interns, I was teaching them post exposure prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infection. I'm not sure if I taught you sexually transmitted infection, but there is such thing as doxypep trial, no? So what is that? After having sexual encounter, a random sexual encounter, and you have to protect yourself with gonorrhea, chlamydia, no, and even syphilis. For these infections, um, right within 24 to 48 hours, you can take doxycycline, 2 caps, single dose. It is also protective for sexually transmitted infection. So, guys, some people do that, one night stands, no. So when they do, or sometimes rape victims, no. So you can take doxycycline right away, no, after the sexual activity to prevent you from having such infection. So this is also being done in patients with leptospirosis. So the thing is, one of my interns before, he kept on asking me for prescription for doxycycline. So I just give. But the thing is, there is no flood, so he might be using it for something else. No, so better protect yourself. Okay. But for leptospirosis, you just remember, in the absence of wounds, single dose. In the presence of wounds, 3 to 5 days. But for patients with chronic exposure, you can give them once weekly. So for this case, since there is a wound, it should have been given for 3 to 5 days. Okay, so that is the end for leptospirosis. Very, very fast. Now let's talk about the second topic, typhoid. No, wait, I'm just opening my notes. If we still have time, let's do the FUO also. These are the short topics, so you will not be cramped up. No, wait. Typhoid. Hmm. I'll just close the first PowerPoint, sorry. Do you have questions? If you do have, you can just PM me, okay? Oh, so now let's talk about salmonellosis. Okay. I have guys, can you see the slide? Did we change the slide?
Yes po, Doc.
Thank you very much. No, so let's talk about the second topic. This is salmonellosis. We're going to look at this case, headache, abdominal pain, but the neutrophils, sorry, the WBCs is low, and likewise the neutrophils and the platelet are also low. But the IgG and IgM, no, these are the tests you use for dengue, are also low.
slide of typhoid fever po.
Oh my gosh. Then I have to repeat everything. Sorry. I thought we could cramp up the lecture, no? Ma'am Myra was not able to mention if ever the connection is interrupted, you could send me a PM, no? So some of you guys are my students and you know my number. I have to repeat the typhoid. I thought, oh, sorry, Adrian, thank you. You mentioned message me that that I have been disconnected. I did not see that. No, I'm sorry. So we'll just repeat the salmonellosis. I apologize. I thought we could still discuss the FUO, but let's see if time permits. Okay. Anyways, this is a very short topic also. I'm sorry, guys. I did not know I was just talking to my laptop. Okay. If we still have time, then we'll be discussing septic. I sorry. About this time, can you see it?
Yes po.
Okay. May I ask if this is moving?
Yes, Doc.
Okay. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I finished an entire lecture without knowing you guys are still around. That's the reason why I don't like online classes personally, but I cannot attend right now. So I just asked Ma'am Myra. I don't want you guys to miss your lectures. No. So anyway, thank you again, Adrian, for sending me a message. Anyway, let's do this. No. So if you're going to look at the case being presented, no. So your patient is presenting with fever of more than 7 days, leukocytopenia, low neutrophils, and low platelet count, and has been febrile. But if you're going to look at the case, one of the findings here is very striking, and that would be the presence of low heart rate despite your patient being febrile, and the fact that your patient is already having fever for more than 5 days. So if you see such patients, you have to consider salmonellosis. Now, let's talk about salmonellosis. Your salmonellosis has two species, your Salmonella enteritica and Salmonella bongori. There are different serotypes. Your somatic O antigen for lipopolysaccharide, you just look at the letter O, the V antigen, and the flagellar H antigen. But for the purpose of your exam, I don't usually ask this because this is also being asked in your pathology and microbiology. So let's focus more on the on the management options. So your salmonellosis is actually a gram-negative organism acid producer. All of them are capable of producing hydrogen sulfide except your S. typhi. Okay? So next, let's talk about the pathogenesis. Which of the following does not increase susceptibility to salmonella? Um, if you're going to look at this question, you have to remember that uh, if you're talking about salmonellosis, you have to remember that acidity is actually protective to to you for you to acquire salmonellosis, no? So anytime you have decreased stomach acidity, you can suspect an increased risk for acquiring salmonellosis, no? So if there is acid suppression therapy, if your patient is taking proton pump inhibitors or chlorhydric diseases, then your patient will have decreased stomach acidity. It increases the risk for salmonellosis. Likewise, if there is a decrease in intestinal integrity, you have to suspect salmonellosis, inflammatory bowel disease, chemotherapy, GI surgery, or alteration of intestinal microbiome. So ingestion is the most common cause of acquiring salmonellosis. Now, these are just nice to know. For this slide, you just have to remember that in salmonellosis, the salmonella organism is capable of surviving intracellularly. That's the reason why sometimes it does not recruit fellow leukocytes, and this would explain why the leukocytes are lower in patient with salmonella infection. So once it crosses the epithelial layer of the GI tract, it will now produce enteric fever. Okay? So these are the different resistance pattern for salmonellosis. You don't have to remember these. These are only nice to know. Your POPOQ, which alters bacterial surface and thereby resisting microbicidal activities. So only nice to know for now, no, unless you're taking the exam. So once it is phagocytized, it is disseminated throughout the body. It goes to the reticuloendothelial system involving the liver, the spleen, the lymph nodes, and the bone marrow. And then the patient will present it with fever and abdominal pain, no, from the secretion of the cytokines in the macrophages. So remember, since this is removing, um, because this is involving multi-organ, sometimes your patient will also develop hepatosplenomegaly, just like in patients with leptospirosis. And these recruitments, since they are residing in the Peyer's patches, sometimes it will lead to necrosis of Peyer's patches, thereby leading to perforation of the intestines. In contrast, your non-typhoid usually with mononuclear elevations, and the degranulation and release of toxic substance increase susceptibility to salmonellosis. If there is inflammatory bowel disease, if there are prior gastrointestinal surgery, or patients with recent intake of antibiotics, you have to suspect salmonellosis. Okay, so therefore, if patients have hyperacidity, it has a lower chance of acquiring salmonellosis. Now, enteric typhoid fever is actually a systemic disease characterized by fever and abdominal